You are listening to Arcane Carolinas, an exploration of the Carolinas folklore, legends, myths, and modern weird. Each episode, we examine the historical context of our topic and aim to preserve some of the stories that help make this part of the world such a fascinating place. All right, you're listening to Arcane Carolinas. I'm Charlie Mushaw, fun-sized candy enthusiast.
And I'm Michael Williams, enthusiast for the word fun-sized. I don't know. I like that phrase. That's not a word. It's a phrase, but still. I guess it's a compound word. I don't know. English doesn't really have those.
This has it as two.
Okay. Then I like that phrase because a phrase is two or more words.
There you go.
Speaking of phrases, look at that segue. One of my favorite phrases from North Carolina legendary and lore is the vampire beast of Bladenboro.
Yay!
I love the Beast of Bladenboro. I first read about the Beast of Bladenboro when I was in 8th grade. I distinctly remember where in the school library I was. I don't remember what book it was in, but I remember reading about it at a specific table and just lighting up over the possibility that something like this had happened from that perspective so recently.
Right.
But
At this point, it would have happened if you were reading about that in the 80s, the same amount of time that we're talking about the 80s to now.
yes, exactly.
Somewhere in there.
Yeah, it was exactly at the midpoint between the actual event and now that I read about this.
The first time I heard about this was from you for a project I was working on where I needed to collect North Carolina folklore.
Yeah, this is one of my go-to North Carolina weird legend stories. I love this, and I love some of the more surprising elements of it. It is the vampire beast of Bladenboro, so let's talk a little about Bladenboro, which is in Bladen County.
Ooh.
Yeah, but it's not the county seat of Bladen County.
I was about to say, it must be like what they named the county after, but I guess not. Okay.
No, so they named the county after this dude who was a guy who was imported in England in the 18th century, maybe even the 17th century.
Was his last name Bladen?
It was.
He also sounds like a villain in like a Japanese RPG.
He kind of does. He would have the magic sword, and you'd have to go after him, and his name would be Bladen. It would be very on the nose. That would happen at like the midpoint in the story.
He transforms into a beast after you think you've beaten him.
Oh, I like this even more.
His true form is revealed.
Somebody out there steal that idea and make it into a JRPG that I can play so that I don't have to learn how to make JRPGs. So, Bladen County. I'm going to talk a little about the history of Bladen County because you talked about the history of Chatham County.
Yep.
Formed in 1734 as, quote, Bladen Precinct, a division of what no longer exists, which was Bath County. In the colonial era, there was a Bath County. An interesting note, the term county, the original English usage for the term was from the ancient counties, quote unquote, from England. Those were pre-existing kingdoms in that region when the Normans invaded England.
Yeah,
so basically the vast majority, like 39 of the 47 or however many counties exist now in the United Kingdom in England, were originally just small kingdoms that the Normans invaded and conquered, and they kept the names around. I find this interesting in part because we just watched Downton Abbey in my household.
Oh, good heavens!
Exactly. And that's set in fictional Grantham County, which is referred to as one of the ancient counties. So
it's an ancient county!
Your Dowager Countess impression is actually not bad. She's got...
I hate everyone!
She's the best character. She's the hero of the story anyway. The ancient counties where those kingdoms were established somewhere between the 7th and 11th centuries. And then eventually that term got created to refer to them. And then in like more contemporary management of the United Kingdom, the term started getting applied in colonies. And then we kept the term when we broke away in the Revolutionary War. I just find that
yeah, it's interesting. But did they spell it all goofy with like extra vowels thrown in?
There were 4 Z's in it, inexplicably.
And they still spell it that way to this day.
Yeah.
Hello,
like
with a U.
So Bladen became its own county in 1739, and when that happened, it was created with, quote, indefinite northern and western boundaries.
You can't do that.
Yeah, you can.
That's the equivalent of a kid being like, okay, you have this bit, and then I have everything that way. When you're like...
You might not be familiar with the history of how the colonial government treated the land and people who were already here. But that is basically what happened. They said, okay, this part is Bladen County, and it goes on until we've run out of place. So
They fall off the map.
yeah, pretty much.
So the flat earthers were at it back then, too.
Yeah. In 1750, its western border was defined to create what's now Anson County. In 1752, parts of it were cut off to form the original boundaries of Orange County, which you talked about.
Yep.
In 1754, Cumberland County was carved out of it. In 1764, Brunswick County. In 1787, Robeson County. And in 1808, Columbus County. And that's what ended up ultimately sort of defining a lot of the counties around it. Bladen County is referred to by like North Carolina geographical historians as the mother county, quote unquote, for North Carolina, because of North Carolina's 100 counties, 55 of them at one point belonged to territory that was defined as Bladen County.
It's like a mogwai, you like throw water on it and a bunch of other counties pop out.
Exactly. So historically, it's known for turpentine and lumber. And in some ways, Bladenboro and Bladen County kind of reminded me of the quote-unquote Lumberton that is depicted in David Lynch's Blue Velvet.
Oh, okay, yeah.
You know, it's a small town. It's down east. It's right next to Wilmington.
Interesting.
You know, that's kind of what it made me feel like. Even like quote-unquote driving around the place on Google Maps, I kept getting this real like Blue Velvety kind of vibe, you know.
Maybe we should write him an email and ask.
Maybe.
What's worse is going to happen? He's not going to reply. Tons of people don't reply to my emails.
Yeah. Then in 1885, brothers R.L. and H.C. Bridger moved to what is now Bladenboro from Little River, South Carolina, to open a turpentine business. The local pine forest.
Business is booming. No, literally, it's explosive.
Exactly. Those people opened a turpentine business, like taking advantage of the way that the economy at the time was turning that part of the state slowly into more lumber and turpentine. And eventually, they went on to become the people that everything in town is named after. These Bridger brothers, they owned the stores, they owned the cotton mills, they owned what was originally the Bank of Bladenboro and then eventually became part of First Citizens Bank. In 1903, Bladenboro was incorporated as a town. And that's ultimately why the town is called Bladenboro, but is not the seat of the county.
Okay.
The county was named Bladen County a long time before the town ever existed. But nobody had used the name Bladenboro, so they did. If you were going to try to get there from Chatham County, which we talked about in the Nice Guy Fight Club episode, it would be so easy, and you would get to take such lovely little back roads. You'd take North Carolina 187 south, which is a lovely little drive on a 4-lane highway, to the town of Tar Heel, North Carolina, population 117. It has a population in the 2010 census of 117 people, where you can stop for goat curry and fried plantains from Patrina's Jamaican Grill, which has 4.9 stars on Google.
I want to go.
Yeah, their menu looks amazing. Hang a right onto North Carolina 131. You take that all the way to where it ends at North Carolina 401 South. And then eventually that becomes Main Street in Bladenboro, which is where you can find the farmer's market and you can find Bridger Memorial Public Library, because everything in town is named after those two dudes.
That's so funny. I wonder if there's like descendants of the Bridgers still there.
Oh, I'm sure.
One of the things that I found, and I didn't want to step on your history lesson or your geography lesson.
Go for it.
Is that there is a Birdsong Peanuts facility there.
Okay.
And, you know, I made the crack earlier about being a fan of fun size candy. Birdsong Peanuts go into peanut M&Ms.
Really?
Yeah. Which I think is kind of cool.
Oh, that is really cool.
They also make this product for children that are malnourished in like third world countries. Okay. So like extreme malnourishment, you can't just give a kid food and fix it. It has to have certain nutritional content. It has to be sort of formulated in a way that it won't make the kid sick. And traditionally, the way this was dealt with for decades was powdered milk. You know, the Red Cross, other international charity groups would ship cases and cases and cases of this stuff to a central doctor, and then people would have to then travel to the doctor for their kids to get treatment. Birdsong Peanuts are part of a larger group, a big peanut, if you will, a larger group of peanut suppliers that partnered with a researcher to develop this nut-based nutritional food that's shelf-stable, incredibly portable, can be packaged in like individual size servings.
Oh, kind of like an energy bar.
kind of like an energy bar, but it's got all kinds of extra vitamins and minerals malnourished children need in a way that they can digest it.
Okay.
And instead of like shipping a case of it to the central doctor's office where the parents then need to expose the child to the elements to get them there, the parents can take home a case of it and then dole it out and administer it. It's like a therapeutic food.
That's wild.
Yeah, I found that to be really interesting. I started with the M&Ms because, it's fun, but then found that out about birdsong peanuts and was like, oh, cool. And again, I didn't want to step on your history lesson. So that was my research into Bladenboro outside of what little bit I already know about the beast, which I feel like is about to grow. They also have a festival. They have a Boost the Burrow festival annually.
Yeah.
Where they talk about local businesses. And of course, there's the beast. There's a beast mascot.
I love the fact that they have a little festival around the beast of Bladenboro. I've always wanted to go.
Yeah, me too. I actually emailed them or filled out the contact form when we were a couple weeks out from recording this. I was hoping to get somebody on. So if you are listening to this and are involved with the people that put on the Boost the Burrow Festival, we really like your festival and we want to come check it out.
Yeah, I would really, really enjoy that. It's not even a stay overnight trip. It's like a 2-hour drive.
And you can get that Jamaican food on the way either to or back.
Gosh. I love the fact that there's a little town of 117 people that has an apparently amazing Jamaican grill. I don't know.
That has a higher Google Maps rating than the Devil's Tramping Ground.
You just never know what you're going to find on the little back road. I love that. I don't know. I really just really sincerely love it. Speaking of the beast.
Yes.
The mascot for this episode. The story starts on December 29th, 1953. I tried to look up historical weather records to see like what the weather was like during that. Like, was it a particularly warm winter or was it a cold winter? But I'm going to assume it was a cold winter. It's December. I want to believe that it was a very cold winter.
That's what we're going with.
Yeah.
That's how folklore works.
Exactly.
That's how the oral tradition works.
It was a dark and chilly night. On December 29th, 1953, witnesses, in air quotes, say they see a creature that is sleek, black, and about 5 feet long attack and kill a dog in the even smaller town of Clarkton, about 8 miles from Bladenboro. And that's according to an article from the Raleigh News and Observer about a week later, in early 1954. 2 days after that, so New Year's Eve, December 31st, a man in Bladenboro named Johnny Vause, V-A-U-S-E, reports that 2 of his dogs have been killed. And I'm going to leave out a lot of the exceptionally gory details about these murders of these dogs because they're very distressing.
Is it like chupacabra style? Like,
it's much more violent than that.
Okay, so it's like a mauling. It's not like
it's like a mauling, but the bodies are found with almost no blood.
Okay.
A lot of the research that I did on this included really graphic descriptions of what was done to the dogs, and as the human of some dogs, I don't want to.
Yeah, no. We don't want this to be a gore fest. I was just
but
trying to draw a parallel.
Suffice to say, the dogs clearly tried to fight back and lost in a big way, and their very badly mangled corpses were found, basically drained of blood. Whatever did this to them was absolutely horrific. Like, I get that nature is red in tooth and claw, etc.,
right.
But the descriptions of what was done to these poor animals is extremely distressing to me and very detailed. I'm just going to leave it out. Suffice to say that one common feature, like I said, was that at several of the sites that I'm about to describe, either there was very little blood or there was not enough blood to make up for the amount that these animals would have had in them to begin with, despite no evidence of them having been moved to other locations after they were killed.
So that's weird.
That's weird. The next night, January 1st, 1954, 2 more dogs are reported murdered in the exact same way. The next night, January 2nd, another dog is reported murdered in the same way. So at that point, we're at 6 total animals killed in 5 nights.
Seems like a lot.
Doesn't it seem like a lot? But where it gets to the beast is that on January 3rd, so the 6th night.
I'm sorry. So that's 6 in 5 nights?
Yeah. Okay, so that had fewer than 800 people.
So 6 in 5 nights means that the monster was extra hungry one of those nights.
Yeah, pretty much. In fact, 2 of those nights, it got 2 in. One night it took off.
Okay.
You know,
There
it
you
has to
go.
rest sometime.
He was treating those nights like it was the Golden Corral of barnyard pets.
Really, for real. It really was. It was at the buffet. So the sixth night, January 3rd, 2 more dogs were found killed and an autopsy was performed on one of them. Now, the information on this autopsy is pretty scarce. I don't have any idea of the qualifications of the person who performed the autopsy. So maybe they were a veterinarian. Maybe they were just whoever owned a knife. But an autopsy was performed. And the News and Observer in Raleigh again ran this quote: "There wasn't more than 2 or 3 drops of blood in him," speaking of one of the dogs. Now, if you're familiar with like cattle mutilation stories and things like that, then that is very familiar territory.
Mm-hmm.
Also on January 3rd, the local police chief for Bladenboro, this guy named Roy Forres, or Fours, I wasn't able to find out how to pronounce his name, goes hunting for the animal with his own hunting dogs, and they refuse to follow the scent once they pick it up.
Ooh.
Right? This is probably not a guy who kept around hunting dogs that were not good at hunting or enthusiastic about it.
Yeah, I mean, look at the time. People hunted a lot more back then, like for food.
Yeah.
Like it wasn't
lot
just
more.
Right. That's how you put food on the table. So you don't have bum dogs if you're trying to feed your family.
Yeah. As one of the parents of a bum hunting dog that was abandoned by someone because he was not good at hunting. Yeah. People don't keep those dogs around. We do, because we adopted him after he got named.
Right.
You know.
No, I got you.
To be clear, I'm not the person who abandoned him. It's really precious. He looks like a real hunting dog, and he is so lazy. So 2 nights after that, a whole bunch happened. January 5th, 1954. A pet rabbit is killed in the yard of someone's home. A local woman named C.E. Kinlaw says that, quote, "a big mountain lion ran at her and was going to attack. So she screamed in fear, and it stopped and ran away," which is really interesting. And more than 500 people and their dogs go hunting everywhere in the woods and swampland around Bladenboro, because at this point, everybody has heard about the beast and everybody wants to be the one to find it.
Right. So that was a massacre, I'm sure, of local wildlife.
500 people in a town of 800. Okay. Now, obviously, some of them are driving in from out of town, but everybody in town is involved within like a week.
It's like Jaws, but the Bladenboro.
It is very like Jaws in so many different ways.
You ever seen the eyes of a vampire cat? Like Jaws' eyes. Except not, because they're like cat's eyes, but big.
So
I want to know who the Captain Quint of this story winds up being.
we're going to get there, actually. This is very like Jaws. So January 6th, the next night, 500 people are out on the night of the 5th. On the 6th, more than 800 people gather in the center of town to go hunting for the beast. More than 800 in a town of fewer than 800. And the police chief, the same guy whose dogs would not go hunting for it a couple of nights before, publishes in the local newspaper that he has a plan to stake out some dogs as bait in order to catch the monster.
Oh, no.
A humane society in Asheville reads about this in the newspaper. Asheville's hundreds of miles away.
Yeah, it's
Hours by car.
not close.
No, they send him a telegram saying, basically, if you do this, you will have so many problems that you will regret this choice. They plead their case very effectively, and he says, okay, it's not worth the bad publicity, and he cancels the plan to stake out the dogs.
It's probably good.
But
why
yeah,
use
good.
dogs? Well, just use some steaks, some raw chicken.
It hasn't broken into anybody's grocery store and stolen their steaks. It's gone into people's yards and killed their dogs.
Got a real taste for dogs
Yeah.
with a side of rabbit.
Yes. So he receives that telegram and presumably some phone calls protesting this plan and says, okay, no, we're not going to do that. But the same day, January 6th, the local mayor, this guy with the absolutely magnificent name of Woodrow Fussell.
Woody Fussell.
Woody
All
Fussell. He owns the local movie theater. And he drives to Charlotte and books for one night the 1949 film The Big Cat.
Nice.
And is like, I'm going to make a little money on this for
Sure.
one night. Why not? And tells a reporter who interviews him, well, I don't think that it's real, but a little publicity never hurt a small town.
Sure.
Why not? Absolutely. We're here
I,
giving
I
them
actually
publicity
agree
right
with
now.
that. I actually agree with that.
100%. I just find it so funny that he was like that fast on his feet that he was like, yeah, that movie, The Big Cat, I'm going to go book it in my theater for one night. I'm going to drive to Charlotte and make it happen. Charlotte was not a short jaunt at the time
No.
either.
No.
On January 6th, those 800 people do not catch anything. They find nothing.
Color me shocked.
Yeah. On January 7th, another dog and a goat turn up dead.
Diversifying.
Yes. And on January 7th, 1,000 people go hunting for the monster and nobody finds anything.
But we managed to trample all the woods.
Yeah. Nobody's going to need to mow their lawn ever again. But, so January 8th, the mayor, Woodrow Fussell, calls off the hunt, forbids people roaming the countryside because the publicity has gotten to be too much, the crowds are too big, and it is now an obviously dangerous situation.
Yeah, 1,000 people running around trying to hunt at the same time in a small area is a terrible idea.
Yeah, they were literally at that point just letting people run around in the dark, trying to shoot anything they didn't recognize. And that is not a good idea.
No.
And the next day, the Wilmington Morning Star newspaper ran an article with the headline, Vampire Beast Wins Battle of Bladenboro.
By doing nothing.
Which I love. However, on the night of the 8th, 4 people did go out hunting. Fraternity brothers from some fraternity at UNC Chapel Hill who drove hours to go hunt the beast of Bladenboro that they'd been reading about in the newspaper. And I am desperate to know which fraternity they were in. I would just love to know that. There are no details on who these 4 guys are. I was not able to find an archived copy of the newspaper article that talked about them. I was able to find a citation that article exists. And I would love to know who those people were.
There were pledges. All right, you want to join? Go run around in the dark. Don't get got by the vampire cat.
Some people get hazed. Some people get told to go capture a mythical beast.
Right.
That's my kind of fraternity.
It's like snipe hunt to the next level.
Yeah. What's interesting is that there are no reports of animal deaths for the next week.
Okay.
Nobody found or caught anything, but as soon as the public hunts are called off, everything stops. On January 13th, though, so a week later, 5 days later, a whole bunch of things happen in one night. A local farmer finds a bobcat in a steel trap and kills it.
Okay.
Mayor Fussell promptly announced that the beast has been found and killed. Show's over, folks. There is nothing to see here. Everybody go home. It is over. And it is horrible to read this, but to prove to everyone that they had killed the bobcat, they run it up the flagpole in the middle of town.
It's a bit gross.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
On the same day, a man in a nearby city says that he hit and killed a bobcat with his car.
Okay.
And the same day, a professional hunting guide claims that he tracked and killed a third bobcat.
Okay. I mean, that's fine. That's all well and good, but bobcats don't, to my knowledge, have vampiric qualities.
Generally speaking, they do not. And despite all of those theories, almost exactly 1 year later, December 15th, 1954, the beast, or something exactly like it in terms of its MO, strikes one last time. On December 15th, 1954, a farmer nearby found, quote, 5 medium-sized pigs and 3 chickens, killed in a manner identical to the beast's other victims. Nobody's reported anything for a year, and then all of a sudden, half this dude's farm gets cleaned out in exactly the same way. The exact same very gruesome means of death and drained of blood.
A year later.
A year later, almost to the day. Local authorities do not like the fact that this has happened and is being talked about in the newspaper, and because there were immediately a bunch of newspaper stories about, is the beast back?
Sure.
And so they blamed a random stray dog, despite there being no evidence for this, and despite the fact that the farmer himself said that's impossible because the chickens roosted in a tree. He didn't have a chicken coop like people who raise chickens use in suburbia where I live. He just had a farm and his chickens roosted in a specific tree, and they would roost in that tree overnight.
It's my chicken tree. You don't have one?
It's my chicken tree.
A chicken tree. Dad, where do chicken nuggets come from? The chicken tree.
God,
don't worry about the mechanics of it, just the chicken tree.
Yeah, don't. Nature works in mysterious ways.
Go out in the morning with a frying pan, kick the side of the tree, an egg falls out, you catch it, you're like, all right, we're good.
It's self-cracking. So the guy was like, there's no way that random stray dog climbed into that tree and killed my chickens. But everybody said that was that dog. The dog has been taken care of now. And so it's over again. People stop talking about it.
Nothing to see here, folks.
Nothing to see here. And then nothing happened again. However, it's kind of easy to see how the vampire tag got attached to it because there was this very unusual point of no blood left in the corpses or very little blood.
And none in the area either. It's not like...
At one scene, there was blood around.
Okay.
But that was described as not enough blood.
Okay.
Looking at some of the reports that described it from different people who saw it or claimed to see it, there's also no commonalities almost between these reports. We've got the report from early on of something sleek, black, and 5 feet long.
Mm-hmm.
We've got one that was one sighting that says that it was 4.5 feet long, bushy furred, and resembled either a bear or a panther, two very different animals.
Either way, it's fine. Teeth,
bear,
fur,
panther,
claws.
panther, bear, panther. It's like a liger, but really complicated.
Family reunions are kind of weird.
Yeah, very awkward. One person who said they saw it described it as small, but said it had, quote, a little one just like it running beside, which I find very interesting. One person said that based on the way that it moved through some underbrush after they saw it, that they estimated that it weighed about 150 pounds because of how much it was disrupting the underbrush, which does not sound to me like small.
No.
One person described it as 20 inches high with a 14-inch tail as opposed to 5 feet long. One tracker who said that they found tracks of what could have been the beast said that based on its tracks, it probably weighed 80 pounds. So we have like all these wildly disparate, totally non-overlapping descriptions of it.
I like the panther bears. I just imagine the panther bears getting together and being like, so you like fish? I mean, it's okay, but it's hard to catch. What do you do? Well, I just stand there and I wait for it to jump out and I smack it. I'm like, oh, okay. I'm still on panther bears and like panthers and bears learning from each other and like settling their differences and then like having a big cookout.
Yeah, no, they go on to like solve crimes together.
Yeah,
they're like a buddy cop movie that's happening.
Yeah, panther bears. So, sorry.
Yeah. You call it fish out of water, and that's the, based on the origin story.
And by the end, they can all catch their own fish. You teach a panther bear to fish, and it'll eat for a lifetime. So what you're telling me is that none of the descriptions match each other.
Yeah, 0 of them.
We've got hybrid descriptions, vampiric qualities, a very curious timeline. Okay, just checking in. Just checking in. Keeping it all straight in my head.
I want to point out that one of them described it as having a smaller one running beside it.
Yes. Okay.
Several of the sightings of it, regardless of the disparity in the physical descriptions, said that it made a sound that was, quote, just like a baby crying.
Okay.
Now, I point that out because supposedly a lot of species of big cats east of the Mississippi are extinct, including the cougar, which is known to still live in parts of Florida, but otherwise is considered extinct east of the Mississippi. Pushed out by development, people cutting down their natural habitats and turning them into farmland, etc.
1,000 person hunting parties.
1,000 person hunting parties in towns of 800 people. Yes. Can you imagine living in that town and not being in the hunting party and just being like, well, there are 1,000 people who are about to run through my petunias to go see if they can find the vampire beast. That's great.
Yeah, I can't imagine actually what it would have been like to be in that town at that point.
Yeah.
I can't.
Yeah. But several of those descriptions included, even though the rest of the physical details were different, if you pull like specific details out of the physical descriptions, you can find details that sort of add up to a cougar. And that's generally speaking what most people who try to tackle what was the vampire beast arrive at. They say, well, it was probably a cougar, even though they're supposed to be extinct in that area. And even though that area does not have enough unbroken wilderness to support a cougar, much less a family of cougars. And even though no one has seen one there since like the turn of the 20th century, and etc. Part of the reason why I point that out is because growing up as a kid in Western North Carolina, way up in the mountains, we would occasionally hear a sound. And when we would hear that sound, we were to go inside immediately. And the reason we were told was because it meant that a big cat was in the area. And the sound, when I asked my grandmother what it was the first time, it was this horrible screaming sound. And my grandmother's words were, oh, that's a mountain lion. They sound just like a woman getting murdered.
Lovely.
That's mountain life for you.
So it's interesting that you bring that up. We are going to have somebody on for another episode later where we talk about a thing called the Cora tree. And that guest that we're having on is an old friend of mine. And one night we were in a state park. There was a group of us and we were like walking around in the woods in the dark, basically just getting into trouble.
Sure.
And we heard the most blood-curdling scream. And we all just kind of looked at each other and we're like, oh no, are we a witness to something horrible now? It sounded just like that. And I did not know you were going to say that. This is not planned. This is not outlined, me sharing this story. So I love that you shared that detail because we didn't know. And we still talk about it. We'll bring it up in the episode, I'm sure, when he comes on. But it is one of those, like, you have your friends that you go get into trouble with when you're young, right?
Yeah, totally.
And he was one of those friends. And then we would go into old asylums and run around in the woods and like basically just looking for weird stuff. And that particular experience stuck with both of us to the point where whenever we see each other, which is not frequently, but whenever we do get around to hanging out and seeing each other, we're like, hey, you remember that time we were in the woods and we heard that horrible scream? I can now tell myself it was just a big cat.
It might have been.
Nope. You said it was a big cat. It's a big cat. Thank you.
Years ago, I read a book where somebody was saying, oh, there are so many reports of big cats in the mountains of Western North Carolina, and that's impossible because they're extinct there. And I saw paw prints from a big cat up in the mountains of what's now DuPont State Forest. Mm-hmm. At the time, it was the privately held nature preserve that was owned by the DuPont Corporation, which is why now that the state owns it, it's called DuPont State Forest. But it's where there was a DuPont factory where my dad worked when I was a kid. Mm-hmm. If you belonged to the recreational association available to families of employees, then you could get a permit and go hiking in this nature preserve that they kept. And I was up there hiking around with a cousin one time, and we realized we'd forgotten something in the car. We were not that far from the car, so we were just like, we'll just turn around and go back and grab it and start over. And on our way back, we saw catamount prints, like mountain lion prints, in the mud that we had just walked through a minute before. And my cousin and I were both like, okay, well, that's it. We're out of here.
Yeah.
And, being up in those places, living in places like that, we heard mountain lions all the time. It wasn't like something that happened every day, but it probably happened at least once every summer when I was a child. Mm-hmm. It's not, to me, at all impossible that there could have been a cougar running around in the woods and the swamps outside Bladenboro.
Sure.
But that's one of the mundane theories. Another one is a bear. There are plenty of bears around, although bears tend to not be, in North Carolina, tend to not be aggressive unless they're provoked. The scream really does kind of point to panther or cougar or something like that, some sort of big cat. I've always loved the term catamount, so a tip of the hat to Western Carolina University where a bunch of my relatives went because they're the catamounts. One theory is that it was a wolverine, which I do not buy into, but I like the name. I like the X-Men, so sure, right. Why not?
Yeah, sure.
One theory is that it was a, quote, wild police dog, meaning a canine in service to a police officer that had gotten loose and gone haywire.
And drinks blood and kills its own species.
Right, and then vanishes into the forest and swamp and is never seen again.
McGruff the crime dog. Horribly wrong.
God. This is from McGruff's dark early days. Yeah. This is from the grim prequel that HBO makes.
True McGruff.
There's another story, which was reported at the time, which is that a local claimed that it was a German Shepherd and Hound mix named Big Boy who had gotten loose, but as he put it, was perfectly capable of leaping a fence, killing a dog, and drinking its blood. Now, that's a pretty tall claim to make about a specific dog.
Yeah.
And nobody really seemed to buy into that. But this guy went around town saying, oh, I know the dog and I know what happened and it's gotten loose and it's mean and etc. I don't really totally buy that.
It sounds like somebody was trying to start their own legend.
Yeah, exactly. One of the things that I like as a mundane explanation, though, is multiple bobcats, which could explain a lot about that night where 3 different people claimed that they found one.
Yeah, and the 2, and the seeing one with a little one.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I'm buying that.
Again a year later when a little bobcat would have gotten bigger.
All right. Food's getting scarce. It's the winter. You got to go eat the domestic animals instead of eating the wild animals.
Yeah.
I buy that.
Totally.
I still prefer spectral, vampiric, otherworldly, flying cat monster.
So do I, personally. Cougar kind of seems to fit most of the eyewitness descriptions, or like it's the thing that most overlaps with the eyewitness descriptions that were claimed, especially its coloring and its size and the part about the screams, which we talked about. But like I said, one problem, the eastern cougar went extinct east of the Mississippi, except for one tiny part of Florida 50 years before this all happened. There is an obvious mundane explanation, which is, what if this was a psychotic person?
Yeah, I did think that. I didn't want to say it because I figured you'd get there, but that I did think that.
Yeah. Like, I don't particularly want to entertain that possibility myself, just because like what happened was so awful, and nothing about these attacks is funny. And so like, I don't suggest psychotic person as a joke. Like really is a possibility that there's a real sadistic person who took out their cruelty on animals because animals are not capable of defending themselves as well as a person or telling anybody about what they've done. And so that happens sometimes. It's horrible to imagine, but it's possible. And I feel like we have to remain open to all possibilities.
So there's a precedent for that with the psychiatric profile of serial killers.
Yes, absolutely.
If an individual did perform these acts, without getting into the gory details, they would be pretty mauled themselves.
Yes.
So that, in my book, is a strike against that theory, where somebody's going to notice in a town of 800 if I'm trying to pick a name of somebody I don't actually know. If Bill down the street is all of a sudden covered in bite marks and claw marks, somebody's going to notice, especially when everyone in the town is coming together to try to solve this.
I mean, it's happening multiple times a night for a week solid.
Right. So while I do think it's important to acknowledge that theory, and it did pop into my head, I do feel like there's a couple more strikes against that than there are some of the wildlife theories.
I think there's enough. It's not evidence. Absence of evidence is not evidence, but
the evidence of absence is not the absence of evidence.
Right. But I feel like somebody in town would have been noticed if that were the case.
Right.
And they would have had to take on multiple animals at once. Like, I don't feel like that's very likely.
And the chicken tree.
They would have had to climb that chicken tree. And I bet that chicken tree is not easy to climb.
No, that's why the chickens like it.
Yeah. Its bark's all gnarly. It's been double dipped. So I think it's very important to point out also that it's not that it never happened again. It started happening again in 2008.
What?
In 2008, over a 6-month period, hundreds of local animals were killed and found in exactly the same way.
Dun, dun, dun.
And then it expanded into cattle. It wasn't just dogs and like pet rabbits that lived outside and things like that. It was bigger animals.
And what time of year?
It was 6 months. It was several times of year.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
Weird.
Nobody's ever figured that part out either. There's a reality TV show apparently called Monsters something, Monster Hunters, Monsters Inc. I don't remember what the name of the TV show is. They did an episode about it because people locally were trying to get attention on the fact that this was happening, and they wanted somebody to figure out what was killing their animals, and nobody would do much of anything about it.
Well, it's just the beast.
People at the time were reporting that it looked a lot like the descriptions of the beast of Bladenboro from the 50s also. A giant black panther-ish animal that was draining the blood out of corpses and leaving them to be found.
Blood.
Yeah. And I've always liked the fact in art of the beast of Bladenboro, it's drawn with wings.
Yeah.
I really love that because I love the idea that it like just took off into the night, and that's why nobody could find it.
Yeah.
And that's why there were no tracks around the bodies. There were sometimes people would say that they found tracks, but there are almost never like successful reports of somebody finding tracks immediately next to the bodies and going looking for the animal. They just find the animal.
So I think it's important to note that as we have noted in several episodes, we don't have all the answers. We're not setting ourselves up to be some kind of expert that you should listen to for definitive answers on Tales of the Unknown. We just like talking about Tales of the Unknown. And in that spirit, I really, really like the idea of it being this winged vampiric creature that flies away.
That is by far my favorite explanation of
it. You know what? Put another tick on that column. I'm with you on that.
For real. I went looking for like, what are some other explanations for this? What are some other myth or legend or folklore explanations for this? I wasn't able to find anything in terms of like Native American legends or lore from this region that were similar to this. I did find a really freaky legend from the Pacific Northwest tribes of the Mosquito Man.
Yeah. I'm good.
But that's not from this region. Another thing that obviously comes to mind that you've already mentioned is chupacabra.
Mm-hmm.
We've all heard that story by this point of
Yeah.
like the goat sucker,
Yeah.
Another one is cattle mutilations and alien abductions of cattle for weird scientific experiments, which lots of research and publications have been about. And I don't particularly have an opinion on, other than that those are really freaky stories, and they're often reported by people who don't really have anything to gain.
Right. In fact, they have distinctly lost.
Yeah, I love the idea that this overlaps with that. And I love it when things in folklore overlap despite coming from very different places with very different explanations behind them. Something out there killed these animals and drained their blood. We have no idea what. And it is horrifying. And I wish that we could figure out the answer so that we can resolve it, But in the absence of that answer, I find it absolutely fascinating to study all the different answers that people have come up with for it.
Every time we talk about cryptids, I don't want to go camping ever again.
Every time we talk about cryptids, I do want to go run around in the woods. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I like the woods. I enjoy the outdoors a lot. But it is scary that it never got solved and then recurred. One time I was on a hike. It was in kind of a rocky area. It was an old rail line that had since been decommissioned and turned into like a path, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this went through a lot of different types of land, including very rocky region where they had like blown out or carved out or however they do it, solid rock, like basically dug through hills. And it wasn't a cave. These are on either side of the track.
Sure.
I remember I was walking and there was a hole. And I would say it was like, those Home Depot buckets or Lowe's buckets?
Yeah.
That big 5-gallon bucket.
Yeah.
The opening of this hole was about the size of the diameter of one of those buckets. And it was just pitch black. It was like a tiny little cave. And I was like, wow, that's neat. This is the middle of the day. I walked over to it and like something in it hissed. And I was just like, I'm out. I didn't have a flashlight, but it was the middle of the day, but it was so deep that you couldn't see anything in there. It was pitch black. And that type of stuff, in saying, isn't it scary that this never got solved or whatever? There might be a perfectly rational explanation for it. There probably is, but it's still scary. There's scary stuff out in the wilderness.
Yeah. And it inspires the imagination.
Mm-hmm. If that story needs to get cut out, that's fine. I don't know where I was going with that other than just telling you a personal experience with weird shit in the woods.
No, that doesn't need to get cut out because I'm going to follow it up with one of my own. Okay. In the place where I grew up, there was a particular mountain where there had been some, let's call it informal gold mining in the 19th century.
Informal gold mining.
I don't think there were very many permits issued for the places I'm about to describe. There had been gold mines on a mountain that was near us, and I had relatives who lived at the foot of that mountain. Mm-hmm. And if we went and walked around on the mountain behind them, which I'm sure was all somebody else's property, but we did not know that. Sure. There were just open holes in the ground 15, 20 feet apart that people had dug or blasted or whatever out in the 19th century when they were doing that gold mining. Like, I don't know that there was ever a gold rush in the place where I lived or that anybody got particularly rich doing that, but somebody tried hard enough to dig these mines that they were dangerous and they were just there. Mm-hmm. And if you weren't paying attention, you could literally just trip and fall into one. By the time I was a teenager, whoever owned the property had figured out that other people went there and wandered around every now and then and had tried to put chain link fences around them to try to keep people out.
Pretty big liability, right?
Yeah. But when I was a child, that didn't exist. And when I was a teenager, it didn't work very well because the way that people celebrated New Year's Eve and 4th of July in the little place where I grew up was that they went and threw dynamite down the old gold mine and everybody could hear it.
Whee!
Exactly. It was just like, that was one of those things. It is not difficult if you stray too far off the path to find things that stand out as both interesting and immediately after that, very dangerous. Mm-hmm. And I love that about straying off the beaten path. Not to be that kid who keeps running their finger through the lighter flame in a movie, but I find that kind of stuff fascinating.
No, it is. I mean, that's why we do the show.
Yeah. So the closest thing that I was able to find to this legend-wise was the idea of black dogs from the UK.
Okay.
And black dogs from the UK are these sort of spiritual, often like semi-translucent or incomplete physically dogs with glowing red eyes. They appear in a lot of different stories. They're a whole genre of legend and lore. Generally, they are harbingers of doom or portents of death or suffering that's about to come upon on the person who sees them. A lot of them are about revenge. Some of them are about guardianship. There are a few that are about a black dog, like leading someone to treasure, things like that. A lot of them, though, are like of the sort of troll under the bridge variety. You know, they're a persistent nemesis that might even be dangerous, but it's often simply just sort of an ongoing phenomenon, like a persistently heard dog barking in a place where there aren't any dogs, in theory, things like that. Or there's like stories of a dog that barks despite not appearing to have a head. You know, dogs that appear at the crossroads, which is, you know, crossroads are a big, we talked about crossroads and the Devil's Tramping Ground. Dogs that stalk people when they walk alone and then mysteriously disappear, stuff like that.
Got one of those in my neighborhood.
Yeah.
A very friendly retriever that the neighbors just let wander around and it'll follow you.
Oh,
I understand that that's not what you're talking about.
It's not, but still.
I'm going to look at him twice next time. I'm going to be checking out his eyes.
There are actually stories of people who were smugglers in like 16th and 17th century England who would get a big black dog and like have it be their lookout, like train it. Because if anybody was approaching wherever they were going to be, like on the shore, pulling stuff out of boats or putting stuff onto boats, they would see the big black dog and think it was a quote unquote black dog sighting and then turn around and run away.
Whatever works.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
But a lot of cases, the black dog stories are sort of the don't eat the food, don't drink the drink stories that we get from a lot of European sources of cultures in the Carolinas. The idea of like, it's the cautionary tale, you know, don't take food from strangers, don't walk alone at night, don't bother strange animals when you find them, things like that.
Yeah.
And maybe,
which is all good stuff.
Yeah. And maybe the Beast of Bladenboro can kind of be one of those for us. Like, hey, maybe don't leave your animals out overnight in December, you know, things like that. Don't turn exotic animals loose if you don't like having your exotic pet anymore, and then be surprised when it comes back and kills everything.
Right. That crossed my mind as well. It's like maybe it was an exotic pet thing. I don't think it was, but it did cross my mind. Yeah. And there are exotic animal shelters in the Carolinas.
Absolutely.
So if you're listening to this and you're like, I don't like my exotic pet. You know, there are places you can take them.
There are a ton of spectral panther sightings and things like that in the UK. And
you're saying there's a chance. You're saying there's a chance.
Absolutely. The most common explanation is that they're exotic pets that were released after exotic pets were banned in the UK in the 70s and 80s. But
spectral winged vampire cat.
See, and I like that one because the thing that if I were going to play the game of I'm going to come up with a theory for what's happening to explain the most esoteric possible version of this. What if the vampire beast of Bladenboro is the spirit of the original ecosystem?
Oh.
Like we move in, we alter the ecosystem, we damage it irreparably. What if the ecosystem eventually comes back and damages us?
That's a movie.
Bladenboro was started by a pair of brothers who went there to turn the vast pine forests into turpentine and lumber. Yeah. But pine trees, so common that we refer to North Carolina as the Pine State sometimes, comprised a tiny percentage of the woodland habitat in this area when Spanish explorers started documenting what they were finding in the ecosystem. Colonizers cut down all the hardwoods, turned it into farmland, and then through various economic disruptions, largely abandoned a lot of those farms, and they got taken over by pine trees. So colonial culture showed up here and just like wrecked the ecosystem. And maybe the beast is the collective spirit of all those cougars that got hunted to extinction and driven farther and farther west as their habitat dissolved before the advancing wave of would-be farmers, drawing half-hearted boundaries for things that they brought with them called counties, but left undefined as wherever we run out of land when they decided that everything was too big to map. And eventually the beast came back and took care of things.
That's some good folklore. I like that.
That's my favorite explanation for this. The more I read about this, the more I was like, I don't want it to be a cougar. I want it to be a big, vampiric, winged cat that disappears into the night after it messes you up.
After it messes your dog up, or goat, or rabbit.
Yeah. See, I don't like that part. That's the part of it that I really don't like. I don't like it coming back and messing with people's pets.
But there was one lady that saw it, right?
Oh, absolutely. And she described a cougar, basically.
Right. Well, this is great. I definitely learned more about the legend than I was aware of prior to this conversation.
Cool.
Is there anything else?
No, I talked a lot. Remember when I said I needed to dial back the outline? This is the shortened version.
This was great. You've been listening to Arcane Carolinas. Thanks for joining us. If you liked it, give us a rating, leave a comment. If you didn't like it, send us an email and tell us why. If you're not wrong, we'll try to fix it.
And if you're interested in award-winning speculative fiction, including science fiction, urban fantasy, and horror, find me, Michael G. Williams, at www.michaelgwilliamsbooks.com and check out Falstaff Books at falstaffbooks.com.
If you'd like to pick up some Arcane Carolinas merch, look at behind-the-scenes info, pictures, videos, stuff like that, all the things that get cut, check out arcanecarolinas.com, where you can get access to our Patreon, our Facebook, our Twitter, our Instagram, all that in one place, including the merch store. Buy a shirt.
Clothe your body.
Drape your body in our wares.
Be our living billboards.